In the deep reaches of a Georgia wildlife sanctuary, an eerie silence hung over Enclosure number 9. Normally, this place would echo with the proud chest beating or the deep roars of a creature at the top of the food chain. But now, all that remained was the heavy, labored breathing emanating from a dark corner. Beneath the shadow of a cold concrete wall, a massive hunk of dark muscle huddled in. That was Atlas, a silverback gorilla weighing over 400 pounds, once a symbol of wild power and majesty. But for 3 months now, Atlas was no longer the king everyone knew. He sat there, motionless as a derelict stone statue, his giant, rough hands pressed tightly over his face, shielding his eyes. Atlas had chosen a painful self-blindness. The world's leading primate experts had come and gone, baffled as to why such an intelligent creature refused to look at the sky, refused to look at his caregivers, and rejected every effort to connect with the outside world. He suffered no physical injury, yet his spirit had imprisoned itself in the darkest of cells. If one were to travel back in time to the ancient forests of the Congo years ago, the cause of this pain would slowly emerge. That night, the headlights of poachers tore through the darkness, and a sharp crack of rifles stole Atlas's entire family before his eyes. Atlas was the sole survivor, but he didn't leave the forest alone. He carried the ghost of survivor's guilt. To Atlas, light was no longer a gift of nature, but a reminder of the horrific night he lost his kingdom and his loved ones. How do you save a giant who has decided that there is nothing left in this world worth seeing? The air inside the sanctuary's executive office was so tense that it felt as if a single spark could ignite the whole room. On the large screen, Atlas's biological charts showed ominous downward slopes. His cortisol levels, the stress hormone, had long ago exceeded safe limits, while his food intake was nearly zero. Atlas was dying, not from a visible disease, but because his soul had given up the fight. Standing before the board, Sarah, a woman with a steady gaze and a heart dedicated to healing animal trauma, was trying to convince them one last time. She didn't use dry medical jargon. She spoke with the voice of someone who understood pain. She knew that if they continued to use sedatives or medical force, they would end up with nothing but a soulless corpse. "We have tried everything," Sarah said, her voice low but clear in the silent room. Music therapy, the finest fruits, even simulated true calls. But Atlas does not react. Why? Because he is punishing himself. He believes that because he was the strongest, he should have been the one to fall that night, not his family. To pull him out of the darkness, we don't need a doctor. We need a mirror, someone who speaks the same language of loss but has not yet forgotten how to hope. That was when she proposed Cooper, a 4-month-old orphan lion cub recently rescued from similar tragedy across the ocean. Cooper was tiny, with a golden coat and a strange, innocent aura. He knew nothing of the predator's hierarchy, nor did he know that he should fear a giant like Atlas. Immediately, a wave of fierce protest erupted. "Are you crazy, Sarah?" one director exclaimed. "Atlas is a silverback suffering from severe psychological trauma. He could crush that cub with a single swing of his hand without even opening his eyes. This is irresponsible." Sarah looked directly at the surveillance monitor, where Atlas still sat like a dark block of stone in the corner. "Look at him," she replied. "Atlas is not a violent beast. He is a soldier who is mentally exhausted. He doesn't attack anyone because he doesn't even dare to touch himself. Cooper is a fragile creature, and that fragility is the only weapon we have. Atlas needs a reason to protect someone again. He needs to see that he still has value to another life." After hours of heated debate, Sarah finally received a reluctant nod. It wasn't necessarily an agreement born of trust, but of desperation. Project Lighthouse was officially activated. Sarah knew she was betting her career and Cooper's life on a vague hope. That compassion is an instinct stronger than fear. That night, Sarah sat alone outside Cooper's enclosure. She watched the little cub chasing a dry leaf, completely unaware that tomorrow he would enter the den of a collapsing giant. She whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for 2 orphan souls about to face each other in a gamble of destiny. That afternoon, the pale golden sunlight of Georgia filtered through the gaps in the high ceiling, casting weak streaks of light onto the concrete walls of Enclosure number 9. The space was so quiet that one could hear their own heart racing. Sarah stood in the observation room, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her eyes fixed on the monitor. The heavy iron door slid aside with a dry screech. Cooper, the tiny lion cub, looked around in confusion. To him, this was just a new playground with strange scents. Cooper carried no submissive hesitation. He trotted across the ground, his ears perked up, listening. In the opposite corner, Atlas remained still, a massive dark silhouette submerged in a self-imposed shadow. His hands were still clamped over his face, an absolute refusal of the outside world. As Cooper approached Atlas, the breathing of everyone in the observation room seemed to stop. The distance between destructive power and innocent fragility was narrowing inch by inch. Cooper stopped just a few feet away from Atlas. He tilted his head, curiously observing the large, trembling creature before him. Perhaps, by some miraculous instinct, Cooper felt no threat. He felt a sadness. He sensed the cold radiating from the giant's solitude. And then, a miraculous moment occurred. Cooper reached out his tiny paw and lightly touched Atlas's muscular arm. It was a gentle touch, devoid of malice, but it carried the weight of calm. In Atlas's world, for months, the only thing he had felt was the darkness and the pain of memory. Caregivers usually approached him through bars or with cold needles. But this was something entirely different, a soft, warm, and living touch. Atlas shivered. His thick skin and rippling muscles quivered as if an electric current had passed through them. He didn't push it away, nor did he roar in a show of dominance. In Atlas's heart, that touch was like a tiny ray of light piercing the pitch-black shroud of that night in the Congo. It made Atlas remember a feeling long lost, the feeling of touching another life without the accompaniment of death or fear. Cooper persisted, seeing that the black rock did not react violently. The cub moved closer, nuzzling his head against Atlas's knee, making small chirping sounds as if seeking protection. Atlas still hadn't lowered his hands, but his shoulders were no longer hunched in tension. The giant fingers began to loosen their grip on his face. On the other side of the glass, Sarah held her breath, tears beginning to well in her eyes. She realized she was right. Atlas didn't need someone to teach him how to be strong. He needed someone to show him that weakness also needs a place to lean. Cooper's touch was not just physical contact. It was a silent dialogue between two orphaned souls. One who had lost everything and was rejecting the future, facing another who had also lost everything but was desperate to keep living. In that moment, the world around them seemed to vanish, leaving only the intersection of two heartbeats trying to find a way to heal each other. The air in the sanctuary seemed to thicken as Atlas began his first movements after a long period of stasis. Those dark, rough fingers, like the bark of an ancient tree, began to pull away from his face. It was a slow, painful process, like a rusted door groaning open to catch the light. Atlas didn't drop his hands immediately. He peered through a small gap between his giant fingers. For 3 months, Atlas had feared that if he opened his eyes, he would see the flashing headlights of poachers, the black barrels of rifles, and hear the screams of his kin again. However, instead of those deathly images, the first thing to enter his vision was a golden speck. It was Cooper. The lion cub did not back down. Seeing Atlas move, Cooper became even more excited. He let out high-pitched cheeps, the frail but vibrant sound of a child. Cooper began to use his small nose to nudge Atlas's palm, then tucked his tiny head right under the giant's arm, seeking the most natural shelter. And then, the final defensive wall in Atlas's soul crumbled. The massive hands that had been used to hide from reality slowly lowered completely, revealing a gaunt face with deep wrinkles of suffering. For the first time in months, Atlas truly looked at another creature. His eyes, once dull with depression, began to sparkle with a strange light as they reflected Cooper's image. A deep, Vibrating sound rumbled from deep within Atlas's chest. It wasn't a thunderous roar to assert the power of the king, but a choked whimper, the cry of a soul that had just found its way back from the brink of death. Atlas realized that this tiny creature was as lonely as he was, also carrying the pain of loss. Yet this child was still trying to connect to love. In the observation room, Sarah could not hold back her tears of joy. She saw Atlas reach out a giant finger, one that could easily snap a large branch. And with extreme gentleness, he stroked Cooper's back. The action was clumsy, but contained ultimate tenderness. Atlas no longer saw a potential enemy. He saw a reason to exist. He saw that his strength was not for agonizing over the past, but for protecting the fragility present right before him. Atlas slowly turned around, his haunting, huddled posture replaced by an embracing circle. He gently pulled Cooper closer, letting the cub lean against his thick chest hair. In that moment, Atlas forgave himself. He understood that he could not change what happened in the past, but he had the right to decide the future of the one who needed him now. The instinct of a king, a protector, was truly reborn. The dark night of the Congo receded, making way for a new dawn beginning to creep into the giant's heart. The change that took place at the sanctuary in the following weeks was like a miracle that no medicine could achieve. Atlas was no longer the ghost of Enclosure 9. He began to step out of the shadows, standing under the Georgia sun without trembling. Caregivers were amazed to see their king eating again, his muscles gradually regaining their former tone. But the greatest miracle wasn't Atlas's health. It was the never-failing presence of a small golden shadow. Cooper became Atlas's shadow. Wherever the giant went, the lion cub would trot along behind, occasionally pouncing on Atlas's heels playfully. Atlas, instead of being annoyed, would often stop, patiently waiting for his little friend to catch up. On hot afternoons, people caught sight of Atlas sitting with his back against the old wall, one hand held high to create a cool shade for Cooper, who was sleeping soundly beneath his feet. The hands that once covered his eyes in total regret had now become the sturdiest shelter for another life. Sarah often stood from a distance, observing them through binoculars, a satisfied smile always on her lips. She knew Project Lighthouse had succeeded beyond expectations. Atlas hadn't just recovered. He had found a new role. He didn't need to be the strongest to fight the ghosts of the past. He just needed to be strong enough to protect the future of an orphan child. In the strange interaction between a gorilla and a lion, the boundaries between species vanished, leaving only pure empathy. One afternoon, as a crimson sunset bathed the sanctuary, Atlas stood tall on the peak of an artificial rock, looking out toward the distant horizon. Cooper stood beside him, trying to mimic the posture of his guardian, stretching his tiny neck to catch the wind. Atlas no longer saw the death lights of the Congo. Now, he saw the beauty of a new day ending in peace. He gently placed his hand on Cooper's shoulder, a gesture confirming a profound bond. The story of Atlas and Cooper spread quickly, bringing hope and emotion to millions of people around the world. It became a profound lesson in healing. That pain, no matter how great, can be soothed by the presence of a kindred soul. Sometimes, we don't need complex solutions to escape our own darkness. We only need a reason to open our eyes, a reason to care for someone else, and a touch sincere enough to remind us that we are never alone. We often think healing comes from being cared for, but for Atlas, it came from realizing he was still needed. He stopped hiding his face not because the world had become perfect, but because he had found something in this world worth looking after. The story of Atlas and Cooper is a testament to the fact that love has no borders, and healing sometimes comes from the connections we least expect. How did you feel witnessing the moment the giant Atlas shed his pain to protect a little lion? Have you ever met a Cooper in your life who helped you through the dark? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear from you. If this story brought you a bit of hope and faith and kindness, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support is the motivation for us, to continue our journey of finding and retelling healing stories from around the world. Thank you for joining us, and see you in the next journey.